So where's there more to say? Kill him. Get him gone off this earth. He's a monster.
I walked in there. I seen him holding a gun, a revolver. I know what it was. And he was shooting my dad in the face. I was his first child victim he started on. Before he went to my brothers and them, he started on me first. So when I looked him in his face, you know, I told him I loved him. He had his pocket knife like this in his hand and was looking at me with, you know, a little tear in his eye, but he had the little evil look on. Like, and he sliced me across the throat. He stuck me in the head with a butcher knife, and I was playing with it, and I fell in the tub and I was playing with it because I was trying to pull it out, but it wouldn't budge. I know he did it, and I seen him, and all he doing is lying to the media, the blogs, just to get out and do more killing.
Some houses are built to shelter happiness, but there are spaces that, once darkness passes through, turn into silent tombs. Have you ever thought that the line between a peaceful family gathering and a bloody mass murder can sometimes be as thin as a single breath? Don't take your eyes off the screen, because the story you are about to hear regarding the Leicester Street Massacre is not only one of the most horrifying crime files in American history, but also a chilling wake-up call about the corruption of family bonds. It is a tragic ending so severe that even the most veteran investigators broke down in haunting anguish. Welcome back to Channel Dark Secrets. Before we dive deep into this journey of discovering dark secrets, please click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Your support is our greatest motivation to keep digging and recreating these suppressed true stories, honoring the truth and remembering the unfortunate victims. Returning to the atmosphere in Memphis, Tennessee in March 2008, a persistent gnawing cold engulfed the city. Memphis was originally a city of music, of bright and bustling streets, but on Leicester Street, all vitality seemed to have been suffocated. A heavy, thick, and agonizingly long silence fell over house number 722 for 40 straight hours. That was not the peace of a busy neighborhood, but a toxic silence that made anyone walking by get goosebumps. Beneath the shade of the porch, neighbors still passed by. They saw the closed windows with protective iron bars. They saw the front door ajar, revealing a patch of darkness. They could still hear the faint hum of a radio coming from inside. Everything pretended to be completely normal. But inside those brick walls, a nightmare had silently taken root, turning what was once a place filled with laughter into an ice-cold graveyard. By March 5, 2008, when the silence became eerily abnormal, the police finally received a request for a welfare check. Officer Randall Davis was the first to step heavily onto the porch. The moment he reached out and gently pushed open the ajar door, a terrifying wave of emotion instantly consumed him. A thick, metallic stench rushed straight into his sense of smell. It was the smell of iron, the smell of rust. The smell of human blood that had been trapped in the suffocating heat for more than 2 days and nights. That rancid, sour smell stuck to the throat, making one choke and feel nauseous. Stepping tremblingly into the living room, Officer Davis saw a foot sticking out from a dark corner. It was the first piece of the crime puzzle. That foot belonged to Hollis Seals, 33 years old. He had collapsed right at the threshold, struck down before he could even realize what was happening. As Davis ventured deeper inside, the scene that unfolded went far beyond the most brutal imagination. The floor was no longer an ordinary carpet, but a sea of reddish-black blood that had dried into a frozen crust. Cecil Dotson, 30 years old, the homeowner, was found kneeling, his body completely slumped over the sofa. Cecil was shot directly in the head and neck. But before receiving those fatal shots, he had been shot through both legs. The killer did not want him to die right away. He wanted him to kneel, immobile, and endure the ultimate pain before taking his last breath. Lying right beside him was Marissa Williams, 27 years old, his fiancée and mother of the children. She lay dead with 5 gunshot wounds on her body, her torso covering Chandra Roberson, 22 years old, Hollis's girlfriend. Chandra's legs were also broken by gunshots. The pattern of the crime emerged as incredibly ruthless and calculated. The hunter had neutralized the adult's resistance first, turning the cozy living room into a theater of pain and despair. Looking back at this bloody tragedy, in your opinion, what is more terrifying about human nature? A. Sudden brutality from a stranger on the street. B. Toxic envy hidden behind the smile of a family member. Leave your answer as A or B in the comments below along with your thoughts. Stepping past the bloody chalk line of the living room, where 4 adult lives had fallen in silent agony, the police officers continued to grope their way down the long, narrow hallway deep in the back of the house. In their hearts at that moment, a desperate prayer arose, hoping that the small souls, the innocent children, did not have to witness and endure the fury of the devil. But when the door to the first bedroom swung open, the cruel reality crushed their every last glimmer of hope. In the dark room, the tiny body of Samario Dotson lay motionless. The young boy was not finished off by cold bullets like the adults. For the children, the killer had not wasted a single bullet. He used the very bare items present in the house, split wooden boards and sharp kitchen knives. Samario had been beaten and stabbed repeatedly, but what wrung the investigators' hearts were the bloody handprints imprinted along the wall. They were not just crime scene evidence, they were silent testimony to a horrific struggle for survival. The little boy had panicked, fought back, and used every bit of a child's frail strength to cling to the wall, resisting the evil perpetrator in the dark until his very last breath. Moving into the second bedroom, the tragedy repeated itself with Cecil Dotson II. The boy lay slumped in a pool of darkened blood, with 7 brutal stab wounds, concentrated mainly in the head area. Such savagery far exceeded any limits of human understanding. The perpetrator had chased the children through the corners of the room, ignoring their agonizing cries for mercy, callous to the utter terror of his own biological nephew and niece, to carry out the slaughter. Just when it seemed that death had swallowed all life inside house number 722 Leicester Street, stepping into the bathroom, Officer Randall Davis faced a moment that would completely alter the course of the case. Leaning over to look inside the cold porcelain bathtub, he discovered the bloody body of 9-year-old CJ. The scene before him made anyone shudder. A sharp butcher knife was embedded deep into his skull, the blade tightly wedged in the boy's head bones. His throat was slashed open, and his chest had suffered multiple severe stab wounds. Davis had mentally prepared for another corpse. But then, amid the atmosphere thick with the stench of death, a small eyelid gently twitched. CJ moved one eye. The boy was still breathing. CJ's survival was a miracle beyond all medical and psychological limits. Remember, that 9-year-old boy had been forced to lie alone in that cold bathtub for nearly 40 hours, bleeding out in the quiet dark, surrounded by the silence of his entire slaughtered family. He had listened to every tiny sound, endured the flesh-tearing pain from the dagger in his head, and clung to a fragile thread of life, just waiting for someone to rescue him. The officers' shouts for emergency assistance shattered the house's silence. CJ was rushed away in extreme urgency. He was not only a fortunate survivor, but also the sole remaining witness, the only key that could unmask the monster hiding in the shadows. That miraculous survival did not stop there, as police went on to discover 2-month-old baby Sanaya, still clinging to life in her crib, despite a fractured skull and a stabbed leg, alongside the safety of baby Cedric. The mission at the scene quickly shifted gears. While doctors fought to save CJ's life, veteran investigators began unspooling every detail at house number 722. Looking at the sturdy protective iron bars on the windows, they realized the killer had blocked the only exit through the front door, turning the house into a closed trap. He had calmly, methodically executed the crime without panicking. He attempted to stage the crime scene by pulling down the victim's pants and placing drugs in the hands of Cecil and Chandra to direct the investigation toward fierce drug gang turf wars in Memphis. However, it was the very brutality toward the children that inadvertently exposed the perpetrator's true nature. Scene evidence showed the killer brought no weapons of his own to slaughter the little ones. He took knives from the kitchen rack and used wooden boards available in the house. He knew the room layout by heart, knew exactly where items were stored, and moved through the dark with total familiarity. The killer was no stranger from the gang underworld. He was someone all too familiar, someone who had walked through this door, shared meals at the same table, and enjoyed the absolute trust of the Dotson family. As night turned to dawn, yellow police tape sealed off the entire Leicester Street block. Outside, residents stood in shock, tears, and outrage. They prayed for the children, wondering what kind of monster could butcher an entire family, wondering how a 2-month-old baby could be subjected to such ruthless stabs. Memphis police faced overwhelming pressure. A house full of corpses, a city boiling over for justice, and a killer still walking free, confident he had erased every trace. He believed he had orchestrated the perfect crime, that he was just an invisible ghost in the eyes of the law. But the killer was wrong. He had left an indelible mark. He had left a survivor in the bathtub, and from a hospital emergency bed, that young survivor was about to speak, about to utter a name that would shock the entire city of Memphis, the name of a person who shared the very same blood, someone the victims once called family. To truly understand the reasoning behind the dried blood on the walls of the Leicester Street house, one cannot simply stop at the moment the gunshots echoed. One must turn back time, looking deep into the darkness inside the soul of a man named Jesse Dotson Jr., to witness a slow yet ruthless journey of corruption, where a biological brother gradually transformed into a merciless butcher. That savagery was not a random outburst overnight, but the result of a fire of resentment accumulated, nurtured, and burning through a lifetime of toxic envy. Jesse Dotson Jr. was born and raised in a setting already fractured from his earliest days. His father, Jesse Sr., was a veteran, a hardened painter who possessed a terrifyingly violent nature. Ever since he was just a toddler, Jesse Jr. had to witness his father raining down brutal beatings upon his mother. In the broken space of his family home in South Memphis, he learned a deeply twisted first lesson. Power was measured by the pain of others, and authority could only be gained through fists. When his mother took him away at 6 years old, he carried a deep void in his soul, and a spark of hatred waiting to burst into flames. Jesse received no proper education. He bounced through 10 different schools, was held back twice in the 4th grade, and officially dropped out in 8th grade. A child with no knowledge and no direction, carrying nothing but a chest brimming with rage. By age 15, Jesse's name appeared regularly in local police records. He didn't stop at petty fights. He began exhibiting the traits of a predator. He was willing to punch a 13-year-old child straight in the face to extort $25, and even threatened to end his own mother's life when she tried to keep him in line. The classic antisocial personality disorder took sharp form. Whatever Jesse wanted, he had to take by force. Anyone in his way, he was ready to destroy. He once broke into his younger brother Cecil's room, punched a hole through the wall, and pointed at his mother's face to declare that she was dead to him. In 1994, the first tragedy struck when Jesse was 19. Living aimlessly and immersed in the drug world, he intentionally scammed a man named Haley Cox by selling him fake drugs made of soap. When the deal fell apart and conflict erupted, instead of backing down, Jesse chose to take the other man's life. He was arrested, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, and received an 18-year prison sentence. His youth was buried behind the cold stone walls of the state penitentiary. Yet the harsh prison environment did nothing to awaken or reform a man like Jesse. It acted merely as a forge, tempering him from an unruly youth into a true monster. During his 14 years serving the sentence, the outside world kept spinning. His family lived on, and it was right here that the most toxic seeds of the Leicester Street massacre began to blossom. Jesse sat in his cell feeling abandoned by the entire world. His mother visited him only once in 14 years. Cecil, the younger brother 3 years his junior, never showed up even once. Jesse chewed through the bitterness of loneliness, blaming his entire family for the suffering he had to endure. He joined the Kitchen Crips gang seeking protection and power. He violated prison rules 29 times, showed disrespect to officers, assaulted other inmates, and once viciously stabbed a fellow prisoner directly in the neck with a shank. He thrived on conflict, convincing himself that the world, especially his family, owed him a massive, invisible debt. While Jesse was locked away in darkness, Cecil Dotson chose a different path. Cecil had once idolized his older brother and had also stumbled into trouble with the gangster disciples. But Cecil made an effort to turn his life around. He worked in maintenance, honest labor, cared for his children, attended church, and tried to build a real home. He rented the house on Leicester Street, creating a peaceful haven for his fiancée and their children. Cecil was stepping up to become a responsible man, loved by his family, and respected in his community. Everything Jesse could never have. To Jesse, his younger brother's success was not a source of pride, but an ultimate insult. In his twisted mind, Cecil had stolen the position that should have been his, capturing all the family's love while he suffered over a decade in prison. Toxic envy acted like an acid gnawing through Jesse's insides. He couldn't see Cecil's hard-earned sweat. He could only see what he had been deprived of. In August 2007, Jesse was granted early parole. He walked free at 32, having lost half his life, with no money, no job, and no fixed address. He had to stay at his sister's house, but his aggression got him thrown out. He worked as an assistant painter for his father, but constantly felt exploited. He began hanging around Cecil's home on Leicester Street, drinking and gathering together. On the surface, they displayed close brotherhood, but deep inside, the volcano of resentment within Jesse was trembling violently. Whenever Cecil inadvertently mentioned that his older brother had just gotten out of prison or showed off new items bought for the family, Jesse felt belittled and disrespected. He hated Cecil's smile. He hated the warmth of his brother's home. Cecil opened his doors wide to welcome his brother, sharing every plate of food and glass of liquor, completely unaware that he was nourishing a dangerous wolf. He could never have anticipated that the man he fondly called Junior was secretly counting every minor slight, transforming them into the pretext for a bloodbath without armor. Sunday, March 2nd, 2008. House number 722 Leicester Street was submerged in the suffocating atmosphere of a late afternoon. The smell of barbecue drifted from the small yard, music echoed from the stereo, and beer cans were opened continuously. On the surface, it was a cozy family gathering, but beneath that thin veil of smoke, an invisible tension bubbled, building up like a powder keg waiting for a single spark to explode. Cecil Dotson sat in the center of the living room beside his fiancée, Marissa Williams, and two close friends, Hollis Seals and Chandra Roberson. They chatted, laughed, and enjoyed their day off. Jesse Dotson Jr. sat in the corner of the room. He downed one beer after another, his dark eyes scanning the house. Every one of Cecil's smiles, every assertion of status by his younger brother, felt like a needle thrust straight into his tattered self-esteem. In the underworld, Cecil belonged to the gangster disciples, while Jesse aligned with the kitchen Crips. The two gangs were rivals on the streets, but inside this house, they were blood brothers. Yet, that flesh and blood bond had been gnawed away by jealousy to the point of utter venom. As alcohol kicked in, arguments broke out. At first, it was just minor jabs about who was cooler, who held more power out on the streets. The bickering gradually escalated into fierce accusations regarding gang laws. The murderous rage within Jesse surged to a climax. Earlier that night, they had acquired a Sig Sauer .380 handgun. The firearm lay there like a lethal invitation. Exhausted by his brother's unreasonable aggression, Cecil reached behind the sofa and pulled out a sawed-off shotgun. He didn't point it at anyone. He merely waved it in the air to assert his authority over the house, wanting to put an end to the persistent quarrel. Then, Cecil did something he would never have the chance to regret. He set the gun down and turned his back. Jesse didn't wait another second. The volcano of resentment erupted. He pulled the .380 handgun from his person. The first shot tore through the air, embedding itself straight into Hollis Seals as he stepped through the front door, dropping him on the spot. Startled, Cecil spun around, catching only a glimpse of gun smoke and his older brother's lifeless eyes. Jesse pulled the trigger repeatedly. Cecil collapsed onto the floor. He didn't die immediately. The 30-year-old man lay in a pool of blood, uttering trembling pleas, begging his half-brother for mercy. But Jesse had turned into a demon. He stepped closer, calmly firing subsequent shots into Cecil's head and neck, and pumping bullets into his legs to ensure his brother couldn't crawl away. Shouts and agonizing screams echoed from the women. Marissa Williams and Chandra Roberson were backed into the living room corner. The window was blocked by sturdy iron bars, and the front door was obstructed by Hollis's body. They were completely hopeless. Jesse aimed his barrel toward them, cold and merciless. He shot them in the legs first to cripple any chance of escape, then unleashed a rapid volley of gunfire to finish them off. Marissa collapsed with 5 gunshot wounds, her body covering Chandra's corpse. Within a few brief minutes, 4 adults lay motionless in a sea of blood. A haunting silence returned to the living room. But the carnage was not over. Jesse stood among the bodies, breathing heavily. He heard faint noises coming from the bedrooms in the back of the house, frantic footsteps and the quiet whimpers of children. They had awakened. They had witnessed or heard everything. They knew his voice, they knew his face, and most importantly, they called him by that endearing name, Uncle Junior. In that moment of ultimate jealousy and fear, Jesse Dotson made the most brutal decision in criminal history. His freedom was more important than the lives of his own niece and nephews. Unwilling to fire more loud gunshots that might alert the neighborhood, he walked silently into the kitchen. He opened the cabinet, selecting a butcher knife and a sharp pocket knife. He decided to erase every witness. He walked down the dark hallway. 9-year-old CJ stood there trembling. He had watched Uncle Junior shoot his father down. CJ had tried to reach for the landline phone, but it was too late. Seeing his uncle approach with a knife in hand, the innocent boy uttered the only plea a child's mind could think of. "Uncle, I love you." Jesse looked straight into his 9-year-old nephew's eyes and replied with 3 cold words. "No, you don't." He swung the knife directly at CJ's throat, forced the boy into the bathroom, and pressed his head down over the sink. CJ raised his hands in a futile attempt to defend himself. The blade pierced through his hand and plunged deep, wedging tightly into the boy's skull. Believing CJ was dead, Jesse left him lying in the bathtub and moved to the next bedrooms. He slaughtered Samario and Cecil II, using wooden boards and kitchen knives, despite the 2 children fighting courageously until their very last breath. He even attacked 2-month-old baby Sanaya in her crib. After butchering the entire house, Jesse did not flee in panic. He spent hours calmly staging the crime scene. He pulled down the victim's pants and placed drugs in the hands of Cecil and Chandra to turn the location into the scene of a gang hit. He carefully picked up every shell casing and removed the knife handles to erase fingerprint traces. Finally, he rolled CJ's yellow bicycle out of the yard, pedaling through the dark streets of Memphis to return home. He used bleach to scrub the bike clean, vomited from the trauma, then washed out the kitchen sink, and climbed into bed as if nothing had happened. For the next 40 hours, he played the role of a brother overwhelmed with grief, returning to the scene with his family and weeping bitterly. His entire perfect plan seemed to succeed as police directed their investigation toward the underworld. But the killer could never have anticipated that the miraculous vitality of a child would shatter all his staging. At the hospital, waking from a coma with a blade wound embedded deep in his brain, little CJ whispered to the female investigator, with all the remaining strength he had, "Uncle Junior did it. He killed my daddy. He stuck a knife in my head." When escorted back to the police station, Jesse still brazenly denied his guilt. But the moment Deputy Police Chief Tony Armstrong played the audio recording of CJ's whispered voice, the killer's cold facade completely collapsed. Jesse's face drained of color, his entire body trembling. When his elderly mother was brought into the interrogation room, she looked at him with tear-choked eyes and asked a heartbreaking question. "Why the babies, Junior?" Jesse Dotson hung his head, unable to lie any longer. He confessed to killing the adults over an argument, and when asked why he had acted so ruthlessly toward innocent children, he offered only one bitter reason: because they saw me. In 2010, 2 years after the bloody night of horror on Leicester Street, the trial of Jesse Dotson Jr. officially opened in the city of Memphis. The courtroom was packed to capacity, suffocating not only from the scorching heat of a Tennessee summer, but also from the extreme tension radiating from the Dotson family. People whose souls were torn apart as they stood between 2 sides of a tragedy. On one side was their own flesh and blood sitting at the defense table, and on the other were 6 departed souls of their loved ones, alongside 3 children carrying permanent scars, both physical and mental. Before the jury, Jesse Dotson completely recanted his initial confession. He deceitfully flipped his story, attempting to construct a fabricated narrative about a gang of strangers invading the home and carrying out the massacre themselves. He brazenly played the role of a victim, coerced by police officers into confessing. But every cunning lie spun by the perpetrator completely crumbled when the most crucial witness stepped into the courtroom. CJ, now an 11-year-old boy, courageously took the witness stand, standing before the man who was once his uncle. The man who had ruthlessly plunged a knife directly into his skull. CJ did not flinch. In a voice clear, yet filled with extraordinary bravery, the young boy looked straight into Jesse's eyes and recounted every single moment of that horrific night in vivid detail. The unadulterated truth from the heart of a child who survived hell shattered every mask of deceit. It took the jury a mere 90 minutes of deliberation to find Jesse Dotson guilty on all counts. He received 6 death sentences plus 120 years in prison, making him the recipient of the most death sentences in the judicial history of the state of Tennessee. To this day, Jesse Dotson remains incarcerated at the Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville, languishing in a solitary cell as he awaits his execution date. His lingering appeals over the past many years have been consistently rejected by all levels of the court. He lives out his remaining days in absolute isolation, condemned by society and disowned by his very own bloodline. Looking back at the entire Leicester Street tragedy, the story does not merely stop as a horrifying crime dossier. It leaves behind invaluable, profound lessons regarding criminal psychology and human philosophy. First, it is a bloody lesson in recognizing the red flags embedded within human nature. Jesse Dotson was not an overnight impulsive offender. He was the product of a prolonged accumulation of violence, possessing a prior murder conviction and over a decade spent behind bars. Toxic envy and malice toward the success of others, when combined with an aggressive nature, will turn a human being into a demon. We often tend to lower our guard around those bearing the title of family, but the Leicester Street massacre stands as a painful wake-up call. Blood ties cannot always serve as a protective shield if, beneath that familial shell, lies a heart entirely consumed by corruption and rage. Second, it is a brutal reflection on the cycle of domestic violence and generational trauma. Jesse grew up under the dark shadow of a violent father, witnessing ingratitude and severe beatings since he was a toddler learning to walk. When childhood psychological wounds are left unhealed or unaddressed, they manifest into hatred toward society and personality corruption. Violence breeds violence, and if it is not extinguished early, that spark will consume not only the perpetrator, but also drag future generations into tragedy. Finally, and most importantly, this tragedy serves as an immortal testament to the extraordinary power of life and hope. Amid the rubble of brutality, the miraculous survival of CJ and his siblings was a true miracle. CJ did not merely survive physically with a knife lodged in his brain, but he also survived spiritually, to stand up and demand justice for his parents and siblings. The bravery of an 11-year-old child on the witness stand proved that no matter how dense the darkness of evil may be, it can never extinguish the light of truth. House number 722, on Leicester Street, has now been completely demolished, leaving behind only an empty plot of land covered in green grass beneath the sunlight. But the memory of Cecil, Marissa, Hollis, Chandra, and the two little angels Cecil II and Samario will never be buried or forgotten. They fell as a profound reminder to the world to treasure and protect our loved ones, to remain ever vigilant against evil, and to never lose faith in justice.